In the ever-unfolding drama of the young and the restless, alliances are rarely born out of trust, but out of necessity, and in the case of Kane Ashby and Phyllis Summers, that necessity has taken on a sharper edge than ever before. Both characters have carried the weight of betrayal, manipulation, and personal losses, and both have been underestimated in different ways by Genoa City's most powerful titan, Victor Newman. Now, with circumstances pushing them together, Kane and Phyllis are treading into dangerous waters with a shared goal that might be bold enough to destabilize Victor's empire, or reckless enough to destroy them both before their plan even has a chance to breathe. The uneasy partnership began with Kane's reluctance to acknowledge Phyllis's persistence. Time and again, she had appeared in his orbit uninvited, interrupting his carefully orchestrated moves with her trademark mix of confidence and recklessness. On this particular day, she walked in on him again, this time while his attention was locked on a tablet screen filled with encrypted notes, hidden lists, and a blueprint for something that could topple even the most powerful player in town. Phyllis, with her sharp intuition, instantly knew she had stumbled onto something big. Kane, though exasperated by her constant intrusions, could not ignore that she had the audacity and determination to involve herself in schemes most others would shy away from. For Kane, who has been burned too many times to count, the idea of letting anyone into his circle was intolerable, but in Phyllis, he recognized the same kind of hunger that fueled his own defiance. Phyllis, of course, was not the type to politely excuse herself. She leaned over his shoulder, her eyes catching snippets of phrases that hinted at deception, strategy, and potential sabotage. She had lived long enough in Genoa City to know that plans scribbled on a digital device usually meant someone's downfall was being plotted, and she wanted in. Kane, annoyed but calculating, allowed himself a moment to consider her boldness. He had been considering who might be reckless enough, cunning enough, and determined enough to walk into a war against Victor Newman. Phyllis, with her complicated history, her grudges, and her own unresolved vendettas, fit that description more than anyone else. Her eagerness was palpable, and though Kane knew she had a tendency to bite off more than she could chew, he also knew that sometimes in order to fight fire, you needed someone who thrived in the flames. The conversation that followed was unusual, even for them. Kane asked her, half testing, half serious, if she had any experience with artificial intelligence. The question caught Phyllis off guard. She prided herself on being tech-savvy, always the one to keep up with gadgets, apps, and digital shortcuts, but when it came to AI, her knowledge was surface level at best. Still, in true Phyllis fashion, she refused to admit defeat. She told Kane she had heard about it, that she could handle it, and that she could learn quickly if given the chance. Kane, suppressing a grin at her bravado, saw an opportunity. He proposed that she take on the role of his AI expert, knowing full well that Phyllis's determination to prove herself would drive her into mastering something she knew little about. For Kane, this was not only about skills, it was about testing her loyalty, her resilience, and her ability to adapt when the stakes were life-altering. Phyllis accepted the challenge with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that often precedes disaster or brilliance. Within hours, she was diving into articles, forums, and online discussions, astonished by the potential of artificial intelligence. The deeper she went, the more she realized that this technology could be more than just a corporate tool. It could be weaponized in ways Victor Newman might never anticipate. Algorithms that could predict his moves, software that could expose hidden financial dealings, automated intelligence that could gather leverage faster than even Victor's vast network of informants. Suddenly, the possibilities became intoxicating. Phyllis, who had long suffered from being underestimated or dismissed, saw in AI a chance to turn the tables. It was not just about helping Kane anymore. It was about reclaiming her own power and proving that she could stand toe-to-toe with the man who had dominated Genoa City for decades. But as with every scheme in this town, the cracks were visible from the beginning. Kane's motivations were layered, filled with old grudges, insecurities, and a dangerous willingness to manipulate anyone if it meant gaining the upper hand. Phyllis's motivations, while similarly rooted in resentment, were driven more by impulse, ego, and the thrill of being in the middle of something big. Their partnership, while potentially powerful, carried within it the seeds of mistrust. Kane wondered how many times Phyllis would show up uninvited, meddling in matters that required precision and subtlety. Phyllis wondered if Kane would try to discard her once he had milked her for ideas, leaving her exposed and vulnerable to retaliation. The more she read, the more Phyllis began to realize the danger they were courting. Artificial intelligence was not a toy. It required precision, discretion, and a deep understanding of how easily it could be traced back to its users if mismanaged. A simple mistake could unravel everything. Kane, however, brushed off her concerns, confident that if they moved quickly and struck hard, Victor would never see it coming. This overconfidence was both his greatest strength and his greatest flaw. While Kane saw AI as a tool to level the playing field, Phyllis saw it as a Pandora's box that could unleash consequences beyond their control. Still, her ambition overpowered her caution. Late nights became her routine, studying machine learning, data analysis, and cybersecurity. She was astounded by the potential, and at times even frightened by how easily these tools could be turned against not just Victor, but anyone, including herself. The irony did not escape her that in attempting to take down the most controlling man in Genoa City, she was now willingly submitting herself to a technology that could control her in ways she could not yet fathom. Victor Newman, meanwhile, was not oblivious. His instincts had carried him through decades of betrayals, challenges, and attempts to dethrone him. Though he could not yet see Kane and Phyllis's plan in full, he felt the shift in the air. Victor had a way of sensing when enemies were circling, and he had always known that Phyllis's stubbornness and Kane's resentment could one day be weaponized against him. The question was not whether he would notice, it was whether Kane and Phyllis could act before Victor's suspicions crystallized into action. In Genoa City, timing was everything, and hesitation was fatal. As the days unfolded, their collaboration intensified, but so did the tension between them. Kane's impatience clashed with Phyllis's curiosity. She wanted to understand every angle, every possibility, while he wanted quick results. At times, he accused her of slowing down the operation, of letting her ego get in the way. At times, she accused him of being reckless, of failing to see that every move they made could backfire spectacularly. Yet, despite the constant friction, there was an undeniable electricity between them, a dangerous energy born of shared secrets and mutual defiance. Whether they succeeded or failed, the impact of their alliance was destined to reverberate through Genoa City. If they managed to harness AI in the way Phyllis envisioned, they could uncover truths and vulnerabilities that even Victor could not conceal. If they failed, however, they would find themselves exposed, humiliated, and crushed beneath the heel of the man they had dared to challenge. In the end, the question lingered like a shadow over every whispered conversation and every furtive glance at Kane's tablet. Was this the dawn of Victor Newman's reckoning, or the beginning of Phyllis and Kane's destruction? Phyllis Summers had never been one to let silence occupy her mind for long, but as she sat alone on a wooden bench in Chancellor Park after her clandestine meeting with Kane, the quiet seemed to echo louder than any of the countless battles she had waged in Genoa City. The late afternoon sun stretched shadows across the manicured grass, and children's laughter in the distance felt like it belonged to another world entirely, one untouched by the endless games of power, betrayal, and survival that defined her existence. In her hands was her phone, a gateway to knowledge that only days earlier she had dismissed as a curiosity, but now it pulsed like a living thing, tempting her with visions of dominance she had never dared imagine. Artificial intelligence. Two words that sounded sterile and technical, but in the context of Genoa City's perpetual wars, they carried the weight of destiny. Kane had planted the seed, and Phyllis, impulsive as always, had already begun watering it with feverish determination. She scrolled through forums and white papers, barely understanding some of the jargon but grasping the potential lurking beneath every line. Systems that could learn, adapt, anticipate. Programs capable of analyzing financial data faster than any human accountant, of sniffing out vulnerabilities in digital infrastructures, of predicting patterns in behavior that even the most cunning mind might overlook. And then her thoughts inevitably turned to Victor Newman. Victor was not just a man, he was an institution, a legend wrapped in muscle, intimidation, and an almost preternatural instinct for survival. For decades, challengers had risen against him, Jack Abbott, Adam Newman, even members of his own family, and one by one they had either been destroyed, outmaneuvered, or reluctantly absorbed back into his empire. Victor had weathered betrayals that would have broken lesser men. He had stared down enemies with enough resources to topple empires, and yet he remained standing, more powerful and untouchable than before. The idea that Phyllis Summers, with a crash course in artificial intelligence and the reluctant partnership of Cain Ashby, could succeed where titans had failed seemed almost laughable. And yet, she could not shake the sense that this was different. Cain wasn't talking about blackmail or corporate espionage in the old-fashioned sense. He was talking about harnessing a force that transcended human cunning, a tool so advanced that even Victor might not anticipate it. But was it really that simple? As she sat in the park, staring at the swaying branches overhead, Phyllis felt the first prickles of doubt. Technology was powerful, yes, but it was also unpredictable. AI was not a loyal partner, nor was it bound by the emotional logic that governed Genoa City's most manipulative players. It was raw, unfeeling, and detached. In the right hands, it could dismantle the walls around Newman Enterprises brick by digital brick, exposing weaknesses even Victor had never considered. In the wrong hands, however, it could spiral into chaos, leaving Phyllis and Cain not as victors but as casualties of their own arrogance. And then there was the question that gnawed at her with quiet persistence: even if they succeeded, what then? To defeat Victor Newman was one thing, to fill the void left in his absence was another. Genoa City had a way of chewing up anyone who dared to crown themselves king or queen. She thought about the companies she could potentially breach, the digital fortresses she might probe with the invisible fingers of AI. Banks, investment portfolios, subsidiaries tied to Newman Enterprises, private correspondence, all of it could be laid bare if the algorithms were crafted correctly. The thrill of it sent a shiver through her, and for a fleeting moment, she felt almost godlike, standing on the precipice of a new era in which power was not defined by legacy or wealth, but by the mastery of unseen systems. Yet even as exhilaration coursed through her veins, so did fear. Because Phyllis knew herself. She knew her tendency to chase the rush of danger, to dive headfirst into risks without calculating the fallout. This was no simple con, no petty scheme to embarrass a rival or sabotage a boardroom vote. This was a weapon of mass disruption, and once unleashed, there would be no turning back. Cain's face flickered in her memory, his steady gaze, his thinly veiled desperation, his hunger to prove himself as more than just an opportunist. He had presented the idea to her as though it were inevitable, as though destiny itself had placed them on this path. But was Cain truly prepared for what they were attempting, or was he simply blinded by his desire to strike at Victor? Phyllis wasn't sure, and that uncertainty left her unsettled. She had teamed up with dangerous men before, but Cain was a different breed, calculating enough to lure her in, reckless enough to make her doubt his endgame. And then, inevitably, her mind circled back to Victor himself. Could AI really outmaneuver him? For all the advances in technology, for all the brilliance of coding and algorithms, Victor's true strength had always been his ability to read people, to exploit their weaknesses, to bend loyalty to his will like a blacksmith forging steel. Machines could calculate, predict, and process, but could they replicate the instinct that had made Victor Newman untouchable for decades? Could an algorithm sense betrayal the way Victor could? Could it anticipate the subtle tremor in a business partner's voice or the fleeting glance of a family member concealing a lie? Phyllis doubted it, and that doubt lingered like smoke, reminding her that while technology might be powerful, it was still just a tool. The wielder of that tool mattered most, and in this case, the wielder was her, a woman with a history of burning bridges and underestimating just how far her enemies would go to retaliate. Yet for all her doubts, Phyllis could not walk away. The very danger that made this scheme terrifying also made it irresistible. In her heart, she knew that Cain was right. They had stumbled onto something extraordinary, something that could rewrite the rules of Genoa City. Whether it would elevate them to unimaginable heights or drag them into the abyss was uncertain, but uncertainty had never stopped Phyllis Summers before. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she rose from the bench, her decision made not with words but with the sharp glint of determination in her eyes. She would master this technology, she would wield it like a sword, and she would see just how far it could carry her. If Victor Newman was the immovable object, then perhaps artificial intelligence could be the unstoppable force. But in Genoa City, nothing was ever that simple. Already, whispers of unusual digital activity were surfacing in obscure corners of the financial world. Already, Newman's security experts were noticing anomalies they couldn't explain. Victor's instincts, honed over decades of battle, were stirring, and though he could not yet see Phyllis's hand in this, he felt the tremors of a storm brewing. For Phyllis, the game had just begun, but for Victor, it was simply another challenge in a lifetime defined by them. The question that loomed larger than any other was not whether artificial intelligence could outsmart Victor Newman, it was whether Phyllis and Kane had the discipline, the foresight, and the ruthlessness to wield it without destroying themselves in the process.